All right, joining me is Nick Ducoff, head of institutional growth at the Solana Foundation, which of course is dedicated to the adoption and growth of Solana. So basically, they want to help support the entire Solana ecosystem. That helps funding developers and projects. It helps increase the decentralization of Solana. Obviously, there's a big educational component here as well, right? Just helping people understand what Solana is and its value proposition. And so, Nick, it is great to connect. Thank you for joining me.
Thanks so much for having me.
Okay, so was that an appropriate description of the Solana Foundation?
Nailed
Anything
it.
else you would add to that?
Nailed it. Yeah. The one thing I would add is I think we increasingly see liquidity as a public good. So Solana Foundation is here to, as you said, support the growth, decentralization of the Solana blockchain, but I think also create the market for all assets trading 24/7 with all global market participants in a single liquidity venue, and that liquidity piece is important because it requires some depth in the market for there to be active and vibrant markets.
Okay, and then talk a little bit more about your role specifically. Like, what does a typical day look like for you?
Well, as I mentioned before we started, I'm heading to New York later today. Very excited to join the Fidelity team at the New York Stock Exchange tomorrow morning for the bell ringing for FSOL, which launched earlier this week. But the institutional growth team here at the Solana Foundation works closely with banks, asset managers, and FMIs to support kind of all various blockchain activities. So for banks, that may be custody, that may be tokenized deposits, that may be some borrow lend. For asset managers, that may be tokenization as well as ETFs, and then also capital markets, whether it be the Nasdaq and NYSEs of the world, or those elsewhere such as AGM VAR in the Middle East, and in Singapore and Hong Kong as well.
All right, so I'm glad you mentioned the Fidelity Solana ETF because I thought this would be the perfect time for you and I to connect, given that we do now have a number of 1933 Act spot Solana ETFs rolling out. Of course, Bitwise, they launched the first one a few weeks ago. That already has something like $600 million in inflows. If you look, it's one of the top ETF launches this year out of nearly 1,000 new ETFs. And then Grayscale also launched a spot Solana ETF. That's nearing $100 million in assets. And then, just this week, you mentioned the Fidelity ETF. We've seen other spot Solana ETFs from VanEck, Canary, 21 shares. And so I guess to start, Nick, I mean, how big of a deal is it to see these ETFs now coming to market?
It's really rewarding. It's of course just day one, like literally for some of these ETFs, but I think just generally for Solana, the world is still getting to know Solana. This is not a protocol or token that's been around for 15 years like Bitcoin. It's only been around for close to 5 years, and so as you mentioned in the intro, still a lot of education to do. People are still surprised to hear that Solana is the most used blockchain in the world, and it's not even close. People are surprised to hear, there's 100 million plus transactions a day on Solana. People are surprised to hear there's 80 million plus monthly users of Solana. And so I think it's great that now these really incredible asset managers like Bitwise and Grayscale and Fidelity and the others that you mentioned are out there telling that story for us, right? They're out there educating the market, educating RIAs, educating advisors, educating investors about the exciting things happening on Solana.
It's a great point because in addition to the spot ETFs, we're now starting to see major brokerages roll out direct Solana trading. And so we've been talking Fidelity here. Just a few weeks ago, Fidelity began offering trading in Solana. And along with that, they had an in-depth white paper that came out talking about the Solana ecosystem. How important is that just in helping education?
Yeah, hugely important. And E-Trade has announced that they're going to have spot Sol in early part of next year as well. And so I think you're increasingly seeing BT, ETH, Sol, Bitcoin, Ethereum, and Solana as the three kind of major crypto assets that asset managers feel comfortable putting in front of their investor base. Bitcoin, of course, is digital gold, Ethereum, digital oil, and Solana is the platform that empowers the trading, of all of these assets. And I think that, helping, that drive that narrative that, Solana really as one of the fastest growing technology platform in the world, not just deserves a place, among Bitcoin and Ethereum, but also with the rest of the Mag 7, technology companies that are driving, so much of the growth in the United States and S&P.
Well, on the note of education, let's talk a little bit more about Solana. You just gave a few points there, but I always like to cover the basics. And we can certainly come back here in a moment and talk about the adoption of Solana and tokenization and those sorts of things. But for someone who is a complete novice, let's just say, Nick, they're just getting involved with crypto, how do you like to explain what Solana is?
Sure. So Solana is a technology platform that you can build applications on top of. And it also has a native token, the Solana token, which can be used as a medium of exchange. So it's Bitcoin plus Ethereum, but at the speed of light. And in many ways, it's also Amazon Web Services in the sense that any application that you can imagine, you can build it on Solana. And unlike what we saw last week when Cloudflare had an outage, Solana will keep running because it's decentralized with over 2,000 validators helping support the network every single day.
You mentioned the speed a lot. I know speed's something that is often pointed to with Solana. Talk more about the specific value proposition of Solana relative to other chains out there. Like, how do you view Solana's positioning in the marketplace?
Yeah, so Solana has always been among the fastest and cheapest blockchains. And the thing that differentiates Solana is that in addition to it being very fast and very cheap, you're not making the same trade-offs that you're making, for instance, in the Ethereum ecosystem. So Ethereum has a scaling issue at the layer one. So Ethereum mainnet is quite constrained. It has about a 15 throughput per second limit. Solana today has a capability of 65,000 TPS, and with FireDancer, which is a new validator client being built, we'll have upwards of 1 million. So we're talking, 1,000x the TPS capability of Ethereum. And I think that's really important because if you want to be, as the world computer, if you want all compute to take place, all finance to take place, on your platform, you need to be able to handle, quite a significant load. And that's what Solana was always designed to be able to do. And it's really living up to that standard. I mean, we see billions of dollars a day traded, hundreds of millions of dollars of transactions, and it performs exactly as it was intended and only keeps getting better.
You mentioned that pretty much anything can be built on top of Solana. And if we go back to institutional adoption, we've talked about the ETFs and brokerages like Fidelity now offering Solana trading, but talk more about the institutional building that's actually taking place on chain, that's taking place on Solana. So tokenized funds, for example.
Yeah, so tokenized funds. So the idea of like the ETFs is TradFi is taking crypto native products, which are the digital assets, and they're wrapping them in a securities wrapper and distributing through brokerage accounts, right? Like that's what the ETFs are. Tokenization is actually the exact opposite of that. It's taking traditional real world assets, tokenizing them, and distributing them natively on the blockchain. And the benefits of doing that are you get to access all global market participants. Those tokens can trade 24/7, and they have settlement in USD, irrespective of where the investor might be. And I think those are real big benefits that clearly are attracting some of the world's largest asset managers to Solana, like BlackRock, Apollo, Hamilton Lane, Brevin Howard, Franklin Templeton, and many others that I know are launching soon. And they want to access that global investor base. They want to be able to reach new markets. And also, if you look at demographics, young people love crypto. Over half of people in their 20s in the United States, have crypto. Whereas if you look at the number of people in their 20s that have brokerage accounts, that number is much smaller.
You mentioned somebody like BlackRock, huge institutional player that is building on Solana. Do you think Solana had to overcome a perception issue, just in that Solana did have a relationship or tie-in with FTX, right? Everyone knows what happened there. But even, I think back over the past couple of years, I think a lot of people would say Solana's only value proposition was meme coins, right? Pump.fun and the like. Has Solana had to overcome that to bring institutional players into the ecosystem?
Yeah. So, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger, right? And I think I joined shortly after the FTX situation. And by the way, the only relationship there was FTX was an investor in Solana tokens. Um, in any event, absolutely. When I joined the Solana Foundation, people would say, "Well, isn't Solana, dead?" And then when meme coins, kind of came and Solana was top of the charts again, people said, "Well, isn't Solana just a meme coin chain?" And now that you've got BlackRock, Apollo, and many others choosing Solana, in many cases first, they're saying now Solana is an institutional chain, and what I'd say is Solana is both, is everything. Solana is a general purpose blockchain. It can be used for gaming, it can be used for payments, it can be used for commerce, it can be used for DePIN, it can be used for infrastructure, it can be used for meme coins, it can be used for institutional trading. And all that activity happens concurrently, with those global market participants in that same venue 24/7. I think that's what makes it the most exciting thing, is because with a Solana wallet, you can access the entire world. And that's really what we're trying to build, is this future of the financial internet, something we call internet capital markets.
Okay, so you've done a good job here talking about the value proposition of Solana. One of the things I always like to do on this podcast is look at the full picture of any crypto assets I discuss. And I would say outside of the perception issues that you just spoke to, which I agree, I think those are largely in the past. I want to ask you about two primary criticisms that I hear regarding Solana. I know you're out on X. I'm sure you see these as well. And we can take these one at a time. So, Nick, the first one that I hear is just that Solana is not properly decentralized, right? That it's controlled by VCs. And so that presents some risk. I'm sure you've heard this. It tends to come from Ethereum supporters. So how do you like to respond to that?
Yeah, it's kind of funny to me because I really see how little of a thumb the Solana Foundation has on the scale, and how much of this activity is happening organically. But so if you look at the cold hard facts, the Nakamoto coefficient, which is a measure of decentralization on Solana, I believe is around 30. That puts it, best in class. There's over 2,000 independent validators that are producing blocks on the Solana network. That's quite a lot. That number is growing, and there's a new technology actually being worked on. It's an update to the Solana consensus mechanism. It's called Alpenglow. But what it does is it will basically split voting and non-voting transactions for validators, bringing the cost to run a validator down dramatically. The other thing that will do is it will decrease the settlement finality from about 400 milliseconds to 150 milliseconds. And the important thing about that is 200 milliseconds is the point at which kind of like the human eye discerns things is essentially instantaneous. So, already Solana is blazing fast, but it's about to become much faster, and it will increase the resilience of the network through more decentralization as more people will be able to profitably run a validator. I mean, the reality is Solana is not Ethereum. People can run Ethereum on a Raspberry Pi, a validator on a Raspberry Pi, because it only has 15 TPS. A network that is ultimately going to be able to handle 1 million TPS just requires more hardware to run it. It's a bigger investment, and thus you have more people that are really truly committed to running the Solana infrastructure that look more institutional at scale, and I think that's ultimately a good thing.
Okay, besides the decentralization concern, which you just addressed, the other criticism that I'll hear is that Solana has had some periods of downtime or congestion. And so I think the thought there is that might call into question its ability to rapidly scale. So how would you address that?
Yeah, so I would say two things. One, the last downtime, I believe, was February 2024. So we're approaching 2 years without any downtime. As I mentioned, Solana is a newer network relative to Ethereum, and so there were some growing pains. And by the way, that was from insane utilization of the network. The reason that happened is because the Solana network is pushed in production and tested, battle tested, harder than any other blockchain in the world. And I would look at a few events this year where the network handled it beautifully. January 19th, the Trump token. Millions of new users came onto Solana, traded billions of dollars, and the network, was perfect. I'd also look at earlier in October when there was the flash crash, where you had network outages of virtually all the layer 2 on Ethereum, and Solana handled it again absolutely perfectly. I'd also note that the way that Ethereum and EVM blockchains handle surges in network activity is they have a global fee market. So the price to transact on the network goes up. So in those moments where those networks saw, spikes in activity, on Ethereum mainnet, it cost hundreds of dollars to send a transaction. So even if I wanted to send you $1 of a stablecoin on Ethereum, it would have cost hundreds of dollars to do that. And on layer 2s like Base and Arbitrum, it cost tens of dollars, as much as $50 to send $1 of a stablecoin. To me, that is an effective outage. Even if the blockchain is still working, if it is prohibitively expensive to use it, that is an effective outage. Whereas on Solana, the medium fee is less than a penny. And because of a concept called local fee markets, even if one program is being heavily utilized, if you and I want to send a stablecoin to one another, you'll still pay that base fee of 1,000th of a cent. So, I think Solana has solved for some of these things in a really elegant way. And that's why more and more and more utilization is coming to Solana.
Okay, so you've addressed the common criticisms. We've talked about the value prop. Let me ask you this, and this is something, I'll tell you, I keep asking of pretty much every guest of Crypto Prime, but I think it's an extremely important question, and it has to do with the competition among various blockchains out there. So obviously, you're partial to Solana, as you should be, but how do you see competition playing out over the coming years? So will there be a dominant chain that, say, financial service providers and asset managers build on? Will there be numerous chains? Are there different use cases? How do you view the overall competitive environment here?
Yeah, so first, I would say this space is hyper competitive and probably as competitive right now as I've ever seen it. And I think that's because the Genius Act and Trump's just generally kind of support for blockchain and crypto have really created a ton of innovation here domestically, which has also forced everyone else in the world, to raise their game. And ultimately, competition is a good thing for users, right? Like it's making everybody better. Steel sharpens steel, right? So I think that's great. Where do I think the market goes? Well, I think you would probably agree, and your listeners would probably agree, that monopolies are not a good thing, right? We generally don't like one company to have outsized power in any market, right? And what you see generally is then a small number, 2-3 players, end up kind of winning the lion's share of a particular market. In cloud computing, that's Amazon, Google, and Microsoft. In ride shares, that's Uber and Lyft, et cetera, et cetera. And I think we'll probably see that happen in crypto too, where you'll see, 2 to 3 winners in the market. I think it's quite likely to be Bitcoin, Ethereum, and Solana. That's certainly where, I would place my bet. How long does that take to shake out? The thing about this industry, because each chain has its native token that they can continue to sell down to fund OPEX, these things can last a very long time. We at the Solana Foundation, I think, have been particularly good stewards of our balance sheet. you might be you and your listeners might be surprised to hear we only have 60 some odd employees globally at the Solana Foundation. We're teeny tiny, and we have this mission to support the Solana blockchain in perpetuity, and we really see that as being forever. And so we want to again have the biggest impact we can with the smallest amount of dollars. And that's really how we amplify. And it's really thanks to the millions of Solana users and tens of thousands of Solana builders around the world that are helping amplify the message and bringing more and more people into the ecosystem.
Okay, so I know you have to head to the airport here shortly to hop on a plane to New York for this bell ringing. So with a few minutes we have left, I'll ask you this. We talked earlier again about the institutional building that's already taking place on Solana. Looking ahead, I'd love to have you just tell us more about the future of securities tokenization and Solana's role here. Like, where do you see the biggest opportunities moving forward, and how will Solana capitalize on those opportunities?
Yeah, so the founding vision of Solana was this idea of on-chain NASDAQ. And really what that means is all assets trading in the same venue, accessible to all people on Earth 24/7. And there's something like 20,000 new tokens launched on Solana every day. There's about 80 million monthly users of Solana. That's about 1% of the world's population. We still have 99% to go. And increasingly, those assets that are coming to Solana are real world assets. So that's money funds, real estate, private credit, private equity, and everything else under the sun. And so I think the exciting thing is being able to go and easily swap out of, whether it's a stable coin or any token for any other token instantaneously 24/7. And that's the vision. We've been very consistent in that vision. We continue to make great progress towards it. But we're just scratching the surface, just the very, very kind of like top of the iceberg is up over the water right now, and there's just a huge mountain beneath it. And so I'm really excited for the future. I think it's incredibly clear that Solana is going to be among, if not the number one winner in this category. You've seen stablecoins grow on Solana this year from a little over 4 billion to now 16 plus billion. To grow 400+%, and the year's not even over, on a base of 4 billion is just incredible. And so I think we'll probably be 50 to 100 billion in stablecoins next year. We've gone from effectively zero to nearly 800 million in RWA on Solana in the last year and a half. I think we'll see that at 3-4 billion next year. And you see some of these predictions from the BCGs of the world that $3 trillion plus will be tokenized by 2030. I think that's right. And I think a lot of that's going to happen on Solana.
Well, Nick, really enjoyed connecting. I thought excellent job explaining Solana and its place in the crypto sphere. So thank you for that. Enjoy the bell ringing. How about Solana having a presence on the New York Stock Exchange?
I pinch myself. I can't even believe it. But we're even though there's just a few of us that can be there inside the New York Stock Exchange. What we do at Solana is for everybody. All 8 billion people on Earth, and hopefully that bell is a signal that it's just day one, and there's much more to come. And we're so grateful for everyone participating in the Solana ecosystem.
Well, thank you for joining me this week.
Thanks so much for having me.
That was Nick Ducoff, head of institutional growth at the Solana Foundation. Hope you enjoyed this episode of Crypto Prime. As always, you can stay up to date on all of my latest guests by visiting CryptoPrimePodcast.com. See you again next week.
Crypto Prime is hosted by Nate Geraci, president of OTR Media LLC. Nate is also president of investment advisory firm Nova Diaz Wealth Management. While OTR Media and Nova Diaz are related by common ownership, they are separate and distinct entities, and anything discussed on this program should not be construed as an official statement by Nova Diaz. Some guests appearing on this program may also be financial sponsors of Crypto Prime. This program is for informational purposes only and does not constitute investment advice. Investing in crypto assets involves substantial risk, including the possible loss of principal. Any past performance figures discussed are not necessarily indicative of future results. Visit CryptoPrimePodcast.com for more information.